So how many people here were at the 140 in September? Woo. Wow, okay. So those of you who are not and wondering what happened, it was an experience, but I wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for welcoming me here. And the topic which I was given to talk about, maybe because I gave myself, I mean, so the deal was I was supposed to have waffles today. So there were two things that got me back to the breakfast. One was karaoke last night, which was awesome. You guys have talent, you know, it's very clear. And the energy that's just there is just great. But the 140 conference, what it brought out was some incredibly terrific people, some of them that you take for granted and you call friends. But these are people that on their own have discovered something about life, something about who they are. And it really was a venue for them to sort of connect themselves to the rest of really the world which they were in and the world that saw them. And it was a really amazing experience for me. I created a format for an event a few years ago, but I have to say that when I was here, it was more like I was a songwriter with a song and I was listening to other people sing it. And I was watching how people took what I did and made it their own, and it was incredible. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit today was something which is sort of a theme for the 140 conferences at this point, which is finding meaning. Which is kind of hard to talk about at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, but I'm going to try. Because the finding meaning part is something that permeates your life, and it's something which connects you and your soul to who you are and what you do. And it's something which, when it's working, is terrific, and when it's not, you kind of feel lost. 3 years ago, when I started doing these conferences, I started focusing on what I thought was something very business-oriented. I was trying to actually, if you remember, if you're on Twitter back in 2009, you might have remembered the race between CNN and Ashton Kutcher to 1 million followers. And I thought that was bullshit. I thought this is absolutely ridiculous. Who cares? And then I saw some other things happening. I figured, who cares about this? And as it turns out, I was an early investor in Twitter because I was using it. I found very similar things to Twitter in the way that radio worked, and I'm very passionate with communications. But in 2009, I thought maybe something bad had happened to this platform that I was calling home. So I started out to do a conference that was going to look at the effects of Twitter as a platform on 4 things: on the media, on advertising, on celebrity, and on politics. Because in America, we had Obama won what I called the YouTube elections in 2008. And you started to see a lot of politicians really in 2005, 2006 start to go to YouTube and stuff. And so I thought I was doing a conference about that. But then in the weeks leading up to the conference, things started happening around the world that kind of changed my mind. And maybe it was the fact that on Time Magazine, Twitter was on the cover of Time Magazine the week before my conference. And then that day in June, the first day of the conference was a Tuesday. The Sunday before that Tuesday were the Iranian elections. And the fact that the whole world was going out on Twitter and YouTube and seeing what was happening in Iran was pretty amazing. And all of a sudden, there was a solidarity amongst people that we never met. A lot of people at that time put their Twitter icons to green. And I think when Wycliffe came to the conference and was dressed in green, it was sort of an amazing moment. And then there was these things going on. There was Rick Sanchez at the time was one of the few people I actually invited to come talk. And I invited him because he was one of the first journalists to reach out to Twitter to connect to his audience. And I didn't know anything about him at all. I just knew that he was the first journalist to reach out. It took me 3 months to confirm him, which was about how much time I had to create the conference. And I made friends with Ryan Osborne at the time. Ryan was a producer at the Today Show. He now has a senior job doing social media at NBC News. But he asked me, would I be interested in having Ann Curry come? Ann Curry at the time read the news at the Today Show, and she was on Dateline NBC, and now she's a co-host of the Today Show. And that day she came to the conference. There was a session we did on the effects of Twitter on news gathering. And I thought it would be a pretty interesting... Robert Scoble actually moderated that discussion. Not Matt, but Robert. And there was a discussion, and all of a sudden, at the time I might mention that Ann had about 30,000 followers on Twitter. And then during this discussion, I never saw this before, the entire audience started yelling at Rick Sanchez, because every time Ann Curry started talking about what it's like to be a journalist in 2009 and the ethics and how this goes, and every time Ann would talk, Rick Sanchez would talk over her. it got to the point where the audience starts screaming, "Let Ann talk, let Ann talk," and it was like I've never seen this before. It was like incredible. It was the speakers, the audience, and they were alive, and boy, they were tweeting. By the end of the conference, Ann jumped from 30,000 followers to 80,000 followers, and within a month, she had 1 million. And it was a pretty incredible moment. It wasn't just her. There's so many other things. I mean, when I put out this call for speakers, that I was looking for people in advertising and politics and celebrity and media. Do you think I actually knew anyone doing that? No. I didn't know anybody. You know, one of the things what I discovered is that if you have a dream and make a wish, sometimes wishes come true. Sometimes they come true in the most unusual ways. And we're living in times right now where your voice can get amplified to a point where it's ridiculously fun. You can't always count on it, but it's a wow. And so, would you believe the first person who responded to my call for speakers was Al Jazeera? And I got a message saying, "We come from Doha to New York City." And they did, actually. And they came and spoke about how they use social media and how they reported in Gaza and how all that happened. And ironically, if I opened up my email from 2009 and showed you the next email in my inbox, it was from the Israeli embassy. And they said, "We come also." They actually came and talked, and they spoke about how they were using, it was the Israelis, the UK, and the US in 2008 started using Twitter for public diplomacy. And I had no idea. And so how do I get Wycliffe John to come to my conference? It was just one thing after the other, and I discovered it was really magical. What was magical was the fact that we have a channel out there that people are listening all the time. And, you know, for those of you who are not active in social media, it's a little hard, but, you know, I'm someone who actually grew up being very lonely. When I was a 9-year-old kid, I think I was the most alone. And so my father told me to contact one of his brothers, which I had no idea why, and I ended up going to his office because he took me. And he took me to his office, and he showed me this little box, and when he turned on this little box, I heard squeaky noises, and there was some dials on it. When my uncle would turn the dials on the radio, it turned out what my uncle was an amateur radio operator, ham radio operator. And I don't know if any of you know anyone who's ham radio operators, but my uncle sat there, and he had me sit down and listen to him, and he started speaking some really strange coded words. He said, he started his day by saying, "CQ, CQ, this is K2QQM, calling CQ." And he repeated this, and I'm saying, what is the fuck? But I was 9 years old, so I probably wasn't saying that. But I was trying to, at least I was thinking something like that. And out of the blue, for about an hour, I'm sitting there, and these people were constantly talking to my uncle, and my uncle would say, "Hi, my name is Fred. You know, I hear you really strongly here in Farmingdale, New York," and it just went on. And after about an hour, I realized I found the cure for loneliness. And I realized that my uncle never had to be alone. He just had to take this box with him wherever he went, and he could always find people. And so I got hooked. So as a 9-year-old kid, I became a little obsessed, because it took from 9 to 12 and a half. But I studied Morse code, advanced electronic theory, which was kind of hard at 9, and the rules and regulations to be a ham. But when I was 12 and a half years old, I had a license to communicate. And I never shut up after that, I think. I used that as a platform. I used to talk on the radio during school. I mean, I went to school, but I was on the radio probably 40 to 60 hours a week, sometimes more. I became a little obsessed with it. But I love the idea of being able to either tune the radio dial and hear familiar voices over time and say nothing and just listen to conversations. I like the idea of listening to these conversations without them knowing it, jumping in and saying hello. Because you never know who's listening to you on the radio because it's being broadcast to everyone. I also like the idea of finding my own frequency, and I had my own idea by then. I used to say CQ, CQ, this is WA2BOT calling CQ. Or about 6 o'clock in the morning on school days, my sisters used to hear CQ, CQ, WA2BOT. I was coming through on their telephones and their stereos. This was their wake up. This is how I woke them up every day. I was not a good brother, I guess, but I did care a little bit. But this is how I communicated, and to this very day, you know, I love radio. I grew up with amateur radio, which gave me a way to have two-way communication. And that was very authentic because you had to be licensed. You know, back then there was CB radio, which you didn't have to be licensed. And I sort of look at CB radios now as to people who are on email with aliases. And you know, and mostly on social media these days, you have to be who you are, so there's a lot more authenticity, so that's more of a ham radio thing for me. But what it gave me, though, is this mindset to communicate, and that it turned out years later my life would be saved because I was a ham radio operator, because in the 90s I discovered purely by accident software from a small company in Israel. The product was called the iPhone. The first iPhone was actually an internet phone from a company called Vocaltech. And in 1995, I happened to be home from work the day that the software became available. I downloaded it, and amazingly enough, you could actually talk to other people on the computer. And about 20% of us used our ham radio call signs online, and there we were, pretending to be on the radio, talking over a computer with total strangers. Because I grew up in a world where talking to strangers was cool. And that's how I connected, and that's how I engaged with people. And of course, so many people thought, this is so weird. Why would you talk to a stranger? What I discovered was voice was an application, and what I realized is that I no longer needed a telephone to talk to somebody. So that ultimately helped me save my life, because at the time I was working in the World Trade Center, and in '96 I got fired, which turned out to be a good thing because I wasn't there in 2001, and the company who I worked for lost 700 people, and I knew I had 400 of them. So I walk around with guilt, but believing that getting fired can save your life, and that being lucky is okay. And I had some really fun stories, which I discovered stuff, but it all came from this common root of wanting to communicate and wanting to connect. And for those of you who are active on Twitter, if you ever tweet with me, I'm never typing and I'm never reading. I'm hearing and I'm listening. I'm speaking. When I type, I speak. And when you type back to me, I hear you in my head, as if you're on the radio dial. And I feel that, and I think that, if you're trying to figure out or find meaning from things, I mean, I've been very fortunate to experience lots of interesting things, but it's sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had this situation that you read someone's Facebook status update or someone's tweet and you start to cry, or you call them, or you do something because you're connected. There's a connection there, there's a bond, and so it's no spoken words, yet those words translate into emotions, and those emotions connect to you. It is possible, and so what I've discovered is a lot of that, and I've found some pretty incredible people who are just themselves, and I think one of the keys to this is allowing yourself to be vulnerable. If you're not willing to stand up and be butt naked in front of the world and allow yourself to be who you are, and you're worried about people not liking you because of who you really are, fuck them. Because you matter, and what I discovered, everyone's voice matters. We're now in a world that has 7 billion people on it, and I believe that everyone's voice in the world matters. And one of the things we're living through right now is a revolution that history will write about, where 43 years or 44 years after the advent of the internet, one of the unintended consequences we have today is that hundreds of millions of people are discovering each other. Hundreds of millions of people are connecting with each other. There are gatekeepers, but they're going away. And the result of that is maybe it's 1 billion people now. They could freely find and communicate with each other, and that's amazing. And this is if you look through history with different revolutions, you have all sorts of social revolutions, whether it's communism, fascism, Marxism, capitalism. This is not a Twitterism, it's not a Facebookism, and maybe it's an internetism, but it's something that's huge, that's a game changer. But through that is also the unleashing of people to connect with each other on an emotional level. And you're able to exchange feelings if you allow yourself to feel. And so it goes to allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to feel connected. And if you try that just once, you might find love. You might find lots of other things too, but you can discover things about yourself if you allow yourself to go. And there are lots of people, when you're younger, you take a lot of people in school take multiple choice tests. And how often it is that you take a test, and you just put, if it's A, B, C, or D, you put B. Even though the most common answer is C, but you put B. and then you change it to C and then it turned out that B was right. Because there's something instinctively that you knew, that something that gave you guidance when you took that B, but you changed it because you didn't have that confidence. And some people find a way to find themselves because they're able to, I think everyone has a conflict between their soul, their mind, and their heart. But the people who are able to start to listen to themselves more find guidance from inside. And I can't explain why or rationalize why this is, but it's there for many people as a guiding light. And the same way that you take multiple choice tests and listen to yourself, the more you listen to yourself, because sometimes that's all you have. But when you can learn to listen to yourself and to believe in you, you become unstoppable. You become someone who can change the world, and I believe everyone can. And it's through certain platforms that you get that confidence. You know, I discovered it a much different way. I didn't use social media. I would just absolutely blindly, I never looked back. I mean, I had a lot of life choices to make, and at a time I had no support whatsoever. I just made them, and I just did it. I didn't ask for permission. You know, it's like, and I just made stuff happen. It's like, if they don't get me, fuck them. Now, I wasn't always like that. I used to be really shy. I would never curse. I would never do anything. And I always used to worry sometimes what other people would think. But then I realized that if I don't look out for myself, I mean, how can you love yourself without, how can you love anyone else without loving yourself? How could you possibly take care of anyone else if you don't know what it's like to be loved and treat yourself at least as nice as you want to treat other people? Because when you put other people on a pedestal, you're not treating yourself necessarily the same way. And so that runs throughout. And so when you're looking to, if you're interested in finding and discovering meaning, it comes from the soul. And it's not a religious soul. It could be a ham radio soul. It could be a Twitter soul. But it comes from the inside. And when you allow yourself to open up and connect, there are amazing things that happen. And you'll start to see through other people you thought you were friends. I mean, I could tell you that sometimes the worst thing to have around you are people that always say yes, except the really worst ones, people always say no. And I had early on in my business career, I used to go to my friends all the time for permission to do stuff. They said, oh, it's a crazy idea. Like, I had an idea of what became Hotmail. I had an idea for all these things. I did do Vonage, but I stopped. I didn't do other things because people told me I was stupid. And it's like, they're stupid. But I didn't know. And so, you know, so I started ignoring those people. And it's like, you see, in high school in the States, maybe it's the same thing in Canada. You have a homeroom. And the thing is, like, every year through high school, you have a new buddy list. These are the people you start your day with. It may not be your friends, but it's a buddy list, people at least you acknowledge the existence to. And what you end up doing is having to reboot your buddy list. It's one of the hardest things to do. But when you're able to connect through people and see through people, and the platforms are there for you to change the world if you want to, because I believe that everyone can do amazing things. I believe that everyone has superpowers that enable them to have the confidence to do great stuff, but sometimes it has to be unleashed. Sometimes you'll see someone who's 8 years old, or 6 years old, or 4 years old, they're child prodigies, they can do amazing things, they can sing, they dance, they do advanced mathematics. And then you see people who are 52 years old still struggling to figure out who they are. But the moment they do, they shine like a star on stage. And I believe it's through these platforms that we have access to allow yourself to find who you are, and everyone and anyone could be a star. It's just letting yourself go and giving yourself a chance to be vulnerable, to take that chance to connect with somebody else. It just takes one connection, because I believe the next person you meet can change your life. I believe that you can have an amazing effect on other people's lives, but you have to open up and talk to them. You know, I started embracing hugging as a way to connect with people because I think it's much more sanitary than handshakes. And it's much more sociable in many ways, and you can sometimes feel other people by hugging. And so I ask you as I end the talk today, please stand up. All of you stand up. You're sitting too long anyway. Stand up. And as awkward as this is, hug someone, please. Give someone a hug. Anyway, thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. And, you know, I believe a hug a day is something which is very bracing and something which all try. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to open up the floor to questions and answers. So does anybody have any questions for Jeff? I know the hugging just kind of like come down from that for a second. Can you stand up, actually? Yeah.
Sure. So I was just wondering, like, when you first found Twitter, when you first got on it, did you have kind of profound realization that this was really kind of a game changer in terms of communication? How long did it take you for it to really click for what a powerful platform that it could be?
Well, yeah, actually, I started using, in 2006, I hired Chris Brogan to be a community manager for me. I had a startup. I actually hired my first community, what I call a community developer, back in 1999. My poor friend Carl Ford, who used to work at Belcourt, who had no idea what community was. I hope he does now, but that was in '99. And then Chris was the second person I hired, and that was 2006. And we were at the Consumer Electronics Show in January 2007, and I could not figure out why Chris knew where all the things were happening were, and no one else did. And it turned out he was on this Twitter thing, and I got an account, but I didn't use it, and so I waited till early February 2007 to start tweeting. But I realized very quickly that Twitter was like radio. And that if you listen to people, if you connect with people, if you share with people, and most importantly, engage with people, amazing things can happen. I learned the difference very early about broadcasting versus listening. You know, I think that autism is something which I think is getting more people have a better understanding of it. But there's a part of Twitter and social media that makes many people have certain autistic characteristics. Specifically, if you know people with Asperger's, one of the defining characteristics is people will talk at you but not with you. How many are you or your friends responsible for something operating the same way on the social mediums? How often are you broadcasting but not listening to somebody? You're talking at them, but you're not engaging in conversations. And there are reasons why you do that, but it's different. But you know, Twitter was the first platform that I was using every day that I actually loved, that I figured, this is really cool. And so I kind of jumped into it head first, and I started saying good morning on Twitter 5 years ago. And whenever I'm awake in a certain time zone, I still say good morning. And the most amazing things happen, because depending upon who's online, occasionally they may respond. It could be Jackie, it could be Jody, it could be the U.S. Air Force. It could be Wycliffe John. It could be, it's whoever's there. And it's just fun. But the game changer for me was in June or July of 2007. I saw a tweet from Fred Wilson, who said that his firm led the Series A round for Twitter. My most productive, maybe my most financially successful tweet, I sent him a direct message saying, "Hi, Fred, can I join?" 2 days later, he said I was in. That was an investment I made. That was a decent investment, although at the time I was a little scared, but because Twitter was valued at $20 million. I didn't know what it was like to invest in a company, because I was so used to investing in companies that had much lower valuation. But that turned out to be okay. But it was really, the game changer for me was seeing the conversations happen. And it's just like when I just intuitively knew that back when I first started using the internet phone, that voice was no longer a service, it was now an application which anyone could then use themselves. I understood that Twitter represented a platform for us to freely communicate, and it wasn't so new. I mean, people forever had the ability to do this, but it's just the way it worked, the way it flowed, it was a game changer. And I called Foursquare. I saw Foursquare 2 years ago, and because Twitter really blew up very big in 2007 at South by. And 2 years ago, I was at CES, and I saw the same behavior with Foursquare at CES that year, and I blogged about it. I actually said that Foursquare is going to become really big at South by Southwest, just wait and see. And it did. Unfortunately, the terms I invested in Foursquare wasn't as good as I got it for Twitter. But I did get in there too. But it was really because you just feel things and see things, but it's a lot of emotional stuff, and if you're not allowing yourself to connect because it's not just the words, and maybe I'm just hypersensitive to certain things, but I've discovered that if you let yourself feel, and that's a hard thing to do because some people grow up their entire lives as rocks, and they can't cry because it's just not allowed culturally for them to cry. But I can't tell you how sometimes I wake up, I feel a certain thing, I see someone, and I'm a mess. And like people's parents passed away, or someone died, or someone got sick, or something happened, and it's like, I know. And I don't know how comforting I could be in 140 characters, but I sometimes try, and you see other people online that are these rays of sunshine that sometimes need to be reflected to the world, or other people just need to know that on top, whenever it's raining outside, the sun's always shining, at least above the clouds, and you just have to just feel it and know it. And so I've gotten more optimistic maybe because of this, because you're not by yourself. And so yeah, I sort of applied a lot of things I knew or understood when I first saw Twitter. And maybe it's not radio for everybody, maybe it's just me, but I think that if you've ever engaged in a meaningful conversation with somebody, and you got to know people who you never met, right? Because we're dealing with a world, right, where in your mind these are people. You don't know what they look like. I can't tell you how many people in the world I spoke to my ham radio versus how many I met. I met some of them. But the people online who I connect with, they're people all to themselves. They have their own virtual space, their own mindset, and so it's fun. So if you haven't tried it before, I do suggest trying to be someone else. Be you. You'll find the you that you were when you're 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and connect back to that person and be a little innocent. Allow yourself to be vulnerable and feel, because it's an incredible ability to discover the person who you are.